But anyway, so this week we are going to talk about factory system upgrades. That's a broad category, obviously. There's a lot to talk about in that category. But I want to kind of take you guys through our product lineup that specifically pertains to factory system upgrades. And we'll talk about each product a little bit, kind of go over some of the details, and then kind of branch out a little bit too on some of the broader scope of some of these things and what we can do with them. So with that, we'll get started. Let me get things going here. So the first thing that we're going to talk about, you guys, is the LC2i. The LC2i obviously is an important piece for us. It is a really, really popular piece, and for good reason, right? The LC2i has some features that kind of carry on throughout the rest of the line, and there's a lot of things to talk about here. There's a lot of things that make this little guy different. Most of you are probably nodding your head. Most of you are probably familiar with the LC2i. Maybe some of you aren't. That's okay too. The LC2i, physically, not a huge piece. It's going to be considerably larger than your traditional, $20 high to low adapter, but this is an active high to low adapter, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So one of the things that we want to talk about today too is not just products, but why factory system upgrade is important, right? Why is factory system upgrade something that we talk about? Why is this something that's still important, basically, right? So one of the things with that, and one of the things that's important with that stuff, is some of the features that are common with the LC2i that kind of play through the rest of the lineup. So as you can see on your screen there's a few things that kind of carry through the majority of our line, and a couple of those are that pretty much everything we make will accept 40 volts of high-level input. So on the high-level inputs of the LC2i, this will take in up to 40 volts of input. What does 40 volts really mean to you? It means about 400 watts. What does 400 watts really mean? It basically means that there's not a car on the planet that you can't work with when using AudioControl products. It also means, to me, more importantly, as somebody that used to install, that you don't have to go try to find signal pre-amp, right? You can just grab signal on the output side of a factory amplifier, run it straight into an AudioControl product, and you're good to go. You don't have to worry about going and trying to find a signal that is low enough voltage to be acceptable or something like that. We can grab it straight from the speaker itself. I mean, if the speakers are hanging in the rear deck, great, grab signal straight from those and bring it into the LC2i, or whatever the case may be. But that's one of the things that's important as far as features that kind of follow through. One of the other things is AccuBase. AccuBase is built into the LC2i, and it's also built into a lot of our other products. And so that's why I'm bringing this up early, is a lot of this stuff you're going to hear us talk about throughout this whole training, and I want to make it clear what those features are so that every time we bring them up, it's not like, hey, what was that again? We want to make sure that that stuff's clear up front. So AccuBase is our technology that is incorporated into a lot of these products to essentially compensate for bass roll-off. For those of you that aren't familiar with what bass roll-off is, or what do I mean by bass roll-off is described as, in my mind anyway, when the bass either plateaus at a certain volume or when it actually decreases as volume increases. So some vehicles will actually have a dynamic EQ, where as you turn up the volume, the radio turns down the bass, right? Or you'll have other vehicles where at a certain volume number, the bass just stops getting louder. So let's say the radio goes up to 60 on a scale of 0 to 60, that's the number it goes to. Maybe at 45, the bass doesn't get any louder. So what you'll end up with in those systems is you'll end up with a car that has a lot of bass at low volume, but at high volume, the bass won't be nearly as loud and it won't sound right. A lot of shops or a lot of installers or a lot of end users will try to compensate with the gain on the amplifier to try to make that better, but there is no compensating with gain. All you're going to do is end up with a system that's just way out of whack as far as tuning goes, but it's also going to make it worse. I've seen plenty of techs just turn up the gain to try to get some more bass at high volume, and what they end up with is, sure, they got a little bit more bass at high volume, but what they really ended up with was way too much bass at low volume. The only kind of band-aid fix for that would be to use a bass knob and try to play with the bass knob with every song. You'd have to jack up the gain on the amp, and then with every song and with every turn of the volume, you'd have to also turn your bass knob pretty much at the same time. Obviously, that's not a great solution. It's not really a solution at all. It's really a Band-Aid, and it's a pretty weak Band-Aid at that. So we developed AccuBase to compensate for bass roll-off. It is a major problem in a lot of vehicles with factory radios, and AccuBass works really, really well. It's super easy to set up, and we'll get into that a little bit here in just a second. So one of the other features that I wanted to bring up was GTO. GTO, for those of you that don't know, stands for Great Turn On. Great Turn On is our auto turn on feature. So when a product like, say, the LC2i gets signal on its input side here, it's going to be looking for DC offset. So essentially, it's looking for 6 volts or more on the speaker or the high-level input leads. When there's 6 volts or more, that's going to trigger the LC2i to say, okay, great, time to turn on. It's also going to put out a remote turn on for your amplifiers. A common question we get with these, with all of our products actually, is how many things can I turn on with that remote turn on lead? I've got 6 amplifiers. Can I turn on all of them off of the LC2i? No. We recommend usually 2 to 3 amplifiers as being the maximum amount to turn on. And I shouldn't just say amplifiers, 2 to 3 peripherals or accessories or devices. You know, if you're also going to turn on an epicenter, or you're going to turn on a DSP, or whatever else it is that you're going to turn on, fine, but only turn on 2 or 3 devices. Anything past that, you should really be doing a relay on the output. So take the remote out of the LC2i, run it to a standard, you know, Bosch single pole double throw standard automotive relay, and then use that to then trigger your devices. Pretty easy to wire up that relay, and we have diagrams on our website on how to do that if anybody needs that diagram. So GTO is super, super useful, and we've got another new turn-on feature coming in the future that we'll talk about here in just a little bit. The last one that I want to talk about that carries throughout the whole line is the 5-year bulletproof warranty. That's something that carries across everything AudioControl does, whether it is a, you know, basic little install widget, something like this, or whether it's a you know, nice DSP, something like this. They've all got a 5-year warranty on them across the board, and that's something we really want to stand behind our products, stand behind our partners too, you know, our installers and dealers out there in the country. We want to make sure that we stand behind you guys and give you guys the tools to be successful and be competitive. You know, if you have a customer coming into your shop and they're shopping brand A versus AudioControl, you know, why should we shop AudioControl? Well, there's a number of reasons for, you know, quality and sound and all these other things. But one of the big things that gives people a peace of mind is warranty. If a company is willing to stand behind something for 5 years, obviously you're, you know, committing to a certain quality there. So I think that one kind of goes without saying, but pretty cool. I see a question coming up there that says, is the warranty transferable? The warranty, you know, what do you think, Chris? Would you say it's transferable?
I mean, most of our products are sold through our retail partners.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's really up to a lot of the retail partners, whether they want to honor an over-the-counter exchange type thing. We kind of have one of the most relaxed warranties out there. We can tell by serial number, since they're all manufactured and serial number here and stuff, if they would be under warranty on a lot of cases. In writing, I would say no, it's not transferable, but you know, we will certainly go out of our way to make sure that the customer is taken care of. So I would say in writing, no, the warranty would not be transferable. But we do back up all of our products, and so if a customer does have a product that is, well, that's part of why we want to make sure that we, you know, you're buying from an authorized dealer of ours, even if you're buying online, is for the warranty. You know, the warranty is only as good as where you're buying the product from, if they're supporting it. So in writing, I'm going to say the warranty is not transferable.
Yeah, and to elaborate on what Chris said there, the big point of that, I think, the bullet point is, it's going to be up to the dealer to really make that decision, and we're going to take care of our dealer. So if the dealer decides, hey, you know what, this guy sold his car to his buddy, it had an AudioControl product in that we sold him, and you know, now that product's having an issue or something like that, we're never going to have an issue with you saying, hey, I took care of this guy, will you back me up? We're always going to back you up with that. So yes and no, to make things extra complicated. So moving on, so with the LC2i itself, you know, it is a 2-channel line output device. However, this does have 4 channels of RCA output on it. So a couple of things on this guy. Oops, I've got it upside down there. So you have your base outputs down here on the bottom half, main outputs up here on the top half. And one of the cool things on the LC2I is that although this is only taking in 2 channels of high-level input, it is giving you 4 channels of out. Now, if you did a system this way, if you bring in only 2 channels of input into the LC2I, and then you do a, say, 2-channel amplifier and a sub-amplifier, like you'll see on that diagram on your screen right now, yes, your customer is going to lose the ability to fade that system, okay? No longer are they going to be able to fade front to rear or things like that. But in a lot of instances, A, they may not care. B, if it's a small enough car, it doesn't really matter, right? If we're doing a small, you know, coupe or sports car, two-seater, convertible, whatever the case may be, and you're using an LC2I as your line output converter, why not do a small sub-amp and a 2-channel and just do a really nice 2.1 system in there, and it's going to be fantastic. They don't need fading at that point anyway. The other question that we get a lot on the LC2I is, does that AccuBase feature affect all of the outputs? The answer is no. The AccuBase feature affects the base outputs. The main outputs are unaffected by AccuBase. And that's a really common one that we get a lot, both phone calls, emails, text messages, you know, Facebook messages. We get asked all the time if that's going to affect it, and it does not, which is pretty cool. One of the other neat things on this guy is the output voltage. On an LC2I, as well as a lot of our other products, we're going to get, you know, upwards in the 7, 8, 9 volt area of output on this guy if you need it, right? Now, a lot of amplifiers obviously aren't going to handle 9 volts of input into them, but if we can get that amplifier as much voltage as it'll handle and keep the gain on that amp super, super low, we can get more headroom, less noise, less distortion, the amp's not working as hard, all good things, right? So that's one of those cool features of everything audio control, is that everything we do is essentially, if you want to think of it this way, a line driver as well. Literally all of them have some sort of line driver built in. So these are just some examples on your screen of kind of, you know, a couple of common ways that the LC2I is used. I would say one of the most common is just doing a bass only upgrade. So factory system, you know, customer comes in, hey, you know, my car sounds pretty good, I just think it's lacking bass. This is common in a lot of newer cars. A lot of these newer cars, the mids and highs, as much as we may not want to admit it, don't sound terrible, but they're definitely lacking bass, right? So these are one of the most common upgrades that the LC2I is used for, is just adding an LC2I, adding a sub-amp and a woofer, and away you go. So that'll be the top diagram you see there. So that's one of those things where GTO really comes into play. You know, feed speaker level in, give this thing power and ground, it'll turn itself on, it'll send a turn on out to your sub-amp, and you're ready to rock and roll. This also does feature a port on the side for the ACR1 dash control knob. So if you are doing a car where, you know, this is all going to be mounted towards the back, and that factory system obviously is not going to have a control for the woofer itself. Most cars don't anyway. We can use the ACR1 dash control knob with this and have independent control of just the woofer. Now again, that ACR1 output, or excuse me, that ACR1 knob only controls the bass output. It does not control the main. So if you are doing a 2-channel or a 4-channel for the mids and highs, plus a separate sub-amp, or even a 5-channel amp, you could feed signal from your LC2I into that and still use that ACR1, and it's going to work really, really well. One other feature that I should have mentioned earlier, you guys, but I'm going to bring it up now, is the fact that we have ground isolation on pretty much every product, okay? So we have a little jumper on a lot of these pieces that we're talking about today that have the ability to isolate noise or get rid of turn on pops, turn off pops, clicks, hisses, whines, that sort of thing. And as we go through the line here, I'll show you where some of those jumpers are, but it's a pretty cool feature that we've built in to try to kind of, you know, help out a technician when maybe they're having an issue in a car. So let's move on to the next here.
Just before you move on, a couple of things about LC2I and modern vehicles with integration is a lot of times, I would say, you know, 85% of the time, an LC2I is used for adding a bass package, right? So, so many cars now have a subwoofer in them. So what do you do if you only have a single stereo, you know, single input to go to the LC2I?
That's a great point. So if we are feeding in just one channel of input into the LC2I, or, you know, Chris brought up the great point that what if the car has, let's say, a woofer in the rear deck, and there's only one set of leads going to that woofer,
that might have been...
what are we supposed to do, right? In that instance, what you can do is one thing you want to make sure of is that if you're only going to bring in one channel, we want to make sure that it goes into the front left channel. The reason I bring up the front left channel is because we want that one. The front left channel is what drives GTO. The GTO signal sensing is done on the front left. So we want to make sure that we feed it into the front left. But what a lot of guys will do is just take a couple of short pieces of wire and make a little jump on the right-hand side. That way it's feeding both of these, and that way we make sure we get outputs on both of the RCAs. But one other thing to keep in mind there too is if you are doing a base package, let's say, I'm going to mute whoever's
He is now.
oh, muted. Okay, cool. If we're going to do just a base package in there, and let's say you can only get to one speaker, or you only have time to tap one speaker, let's say, that's going to work fine. You don't have to bring in 2 channels of audio to this if you're just doing a bass upgrade. But the thing to keep in mind is we want to make sure that whatever speaker we tap into has enough information coming to it in the signal to feed a woofer. So you better make sure that whatever speaker you tapped into was playing some sort of bass before you chose it for your signal, right? But I remember in the shop doing plenty of LC2Is where, hey, it's Friday afternoon, it's 4:30, we close at 6, we're trying to get a bass upgrade done, and maybe all we had time to do was tap one B-pillar, speaker lead that goes to a back door on our way back to the trunk of a car. You can grab one speaker and feed this, and it'll work just fine. The only thing to keep in mind with that is if the customer balances left to right and they balance away from the channel that you tied into, you're going to lose signal. So properly, yes, it should probably be tapped into both left and right channels if you're grabbing, say, front or rear speaker leads as your inputs. If there is a factory woofer that you're going to tie into, that's fine. Bring it in there, make yourself a little loop of wires to jumper over to the other side, and away you go.
The other thing too with the LC2Is and why they're so popular is just because, for a retailer out there, you're going to have less warranted woofers as well, so the signal on LC2Is and all the audio control stuff is not only do you have that bulletproof warranty of 5 years on all of our products, but it's also going to keep you guys linear longer through the volume range on a lot of subwoofers and stuff. So it's just such an awesome upgrade, particularly for sub guys who are a little bit more aggressive on their trying to get more out of it. Yeah. I told people this hundreds of times. If I was a retailer, I would rather sell a customer a 500-watt mono amplifier with an LC2I than an 800 or 1,000-watt one where I'm just going straight into the amplifier.
Absolutely.
So that's just another little.
Yeah, I agree.
Criticism.
A criticism.
A criticism.
I like that. I like the criticism. Yeah, so one of the things we talked about earlier too was the ability for these products to handle more than a little bit of voltage, right? These things will handle, like we talked about, 40 volts of high level input. Why does that matter? Well, I mentioned earlier, it's because we want to be able to work with every car on the road. So even if it is a higher end car, maybe it's a Lexus or a BMW or a whatever, a Bose system and a GM product that just has a lot of power in that factory system. If you take a traditional, little plastic box, passive high to low, $20, $30 retail device like this, and we feed in something like, 100 watts of power from a factory system, you're going to end up with what you see on your screen right now. Okay, these are not photos that we doctored up or made in the back. These are sent to us from, guys out in the field where they pulled this out of a vehicle and replaced it with an LC2I for obvious reasons. You can see that thing has literally melted. Those passive adapters like this, I mean, what these really are, you guys, are basically resistors, okay? You're feeding in some high-level signal, you're running it through a resistor, okay, to dumb it down to a low-level signal, and then passing it back out. It's not doing anything active or productive for the signal. It's not a line driver. It's not doing anything positive for it. It's just dumbing it down to something usable, right? But what does a resistor do with all of that excess energy? It's got to dissipate it as heat, right? Well, if you have all that extra heat, what are you going to do with that? Especially when we exceed the ratings. Most of these little devices are rated for somewhere between 20 to 50 watts. I've seen a few that are rated 70 or 80 watts, but they usually start approaching the price of an LC2I. So at that point, why not just get the real deal and get the the right one? But if you're looking for an inexpensive little piece like this, you had better make sure that you're using it on a card that only has a few watts going into it, or else this is kind of what you end up with. So what I wanted to do too is talk about a little bit the signal that actually happens when passed through something like a basic high to low versus a LC2I. So I'm going to play you guys a quick video from Dean at 5-Star, and he did a really good job in this one of just kind of showing the actual difference between them and what type of voltage you can expect out of them. So I'll hit play on this.
Hi guys, today's from the install bay. We're going to look at high level to low level adapters and why you might want to spend a little bit more and get a better one. Stay tuned. Okay, so what we have is we have a AudioControl LC2I, a generic line output converter, and a pack audio LP7-2. Here's our distortion detector, here's our RTAs, here's our factory radio. Now what we want to do first is set the radio's volume output to the point of clipping so that we have an equal footing for all our radios to test them from. So we'll go ahead and set up our track here. I'm playing 40 hertz at 0 dB. Go ahead and turn this on. And we'll go ahead and start turning this thing up. All right, so we have clipping. Go ahead and turn it down to. We found that -2 on this radio just works best. -2 from clipping. Now we'll go to the output of the LC. We still have no clipping. We'll notice over here the maximize light is on, but the unit's not clipping, so I think we're okay there. And then we'll go to our generic. Generic immediately goes into clip. Now, even if the volume was all the way down, it's still going to distort. So we'll just go ahead and, there was no way to get that out of there. So right off the bat, we know that this is going to induce noise that we don't want. Now, more than likely we'll be able to actively cross that out, but still, it's creating noise that just isn't there. Hence distortion. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the outputs of these guys and see what's going on. Now, a couple things about these. The AudioControl and the pack piece both have remote turn-on generation. So what they'll do is they'll use the signal output or signal input from the radio to generate a remote turn-on out to your amplifiers, which is really nice in a new car because a lot of the new cars, they just don't have an accessory you can tap. So these two guys here will generate one for you, whereas the entry-level one won't. So let's go ahead and we'll take a look at what the RTA is showing us, the output of the AudioControl versus the output of the generic. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the output of the LC2I. It has 6.9 volts of output. We're looking at the output of the entry level. As you'll notice, the signal is 1.8 volts, so you're getting substantially less output, but all this other stuff here, this is where that clip is coming from. None of this should be here, as you can see on this guy here. Now let's go ahead and swap the generic for the pack audio. As you can see now with the pack audio, you get a nice clean signal output. You don't have the output voltage, you know, that's okay, that you do on the AudioControl, but you're getting no noise, so you have a nice clean output. So the LP7-2 will be a nice alternative, you know, an upgrade from the generic one. So I hope what we've shown here is that you may want to spend a little bit extra money and get the better high level to low level. We had two good examples of really nice line level outputs. The pack audio, which gives you a nice clean signal output to the amplifier, no clipping, no induced noise. Then you have the AudioControl, which of course would be the creme de la creme. Now keep in mind, the AudioControl is probably about 4 times the amount of money as the pack audio piece. So we're not comparing apples with apples. What we're doing is we're just comparing why you may want to spend that extra, I don't know, 60, 70 bucks to go up to the AudioControl over the pack. If you don't have it though, at least get the pack as opposed to the generic line output converter.
All right, guys. So that gives you a pretty good idea of what we're talking about with the difference between using a $20, $30 converter and something like what he just called the creme de la creme of line output converters. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I never watched that all the way through, but I really want to go watch Austin Powers now and listen to the background.
Yeah, that's funny. The background music totally reminds me of that. That's awesome. So one of those things, with the LC2I where The other fun thing that I do a lot in my live trainings when I go and do them in front of a big group of people in a conference room or whatever is I'll take a radio with a $20–$30 converter, just a basic passive converter. I'll feed full range signal through it, and then I'll take an LC2I and do the same thing, and I can show, up on a big projector screen the difference between the two, and you can actually see not only is the voltage obviously not the same. The LC2I is giving you, like Dean showed you, a whole lot more voltage, but it's also giving you a better signal. Excuse me.
Without all the artifacts of that going south.
Exactly.
You can physically see, some of the noise artifacts and stuff like that when you're doing an A to B with a passive device versus the LC2I.
Yeah, I mean, he just showed it to you right there on the screen on that little RTA. You saw all that extra stuff that was on there. That was all the noise he was talking about, which was tripping his SMD device to show clipping, right? And it's one of those things where if you're putting in a $20 or $30 converter or any line output converter, a lot of times if it's a 2-channel one, hell, 9 times out of 10, it's probably being put in to do a bass package, right? Most of the time it's being put in to do a bass package. So if you're putting in a bass package, you're looking for more bass, obviously. So if we put in these inexpensive line output converters and they actually take away some of the bass signal out of the signal path, why do we want to put in something that literally takes away the one thing that we put this in for in the first place? Seems kind of counterintuitive to me. So anyway, moving on, we'll go on to the LC6I. This is stepping up to our multi-channel line output converters. So as the name suggests, the LC6I is a 6-channel line output converter. A lot of the same things apply. So this is going to have 40 volts of high level input capability. This has your GTO capability as well. But you'll notice that there is no AccuBase in this like there was in the LC2I, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. But some of the cool things with the LC6I, obviously we can bring in, front, rear, and sub or something like that signal and pass it out as low-level RCAs and get ourselves all the signal we need to, do the system that we want. But one of the other cool things that this does for us is this is one of our most basic devices that does signal summing. So if you need something that sums, no matter how elaborate or basic we need in a system, the LC6I is going to be basically the bare minimum from AudioControl that's going to deliver signal summing. So where that really becomes important is just like the example you see on your screen there. A lot of vehicles have separate signals in the front. So they'll have high frequency only to the top dash and low frequency only to the doors or something like that. Now you may be thinking, well, what's the big deal? I'm going to put in a tweeter in the top dash anyway. I'm going to put a mid-range in the door anyway, so why do I care? Well, the reason we care is because most of the time when we're putting in aftermarket speakers, we're putting in new coaxials or new component speakers where they're a separate system, a separate mid and tweeter, but we need to be able to feed full range signal to those speakers for them to operate properly. If you take that vehicle as is, and it has separately crossed over top dash speakers and separately crossed over door speakers, and we just replace the drivers straight up and take out the door speaker and put in a new one, take out the dash speaker and put in a tweeter, you're going to have some issues. A, it's never going to sound right, and B, you're going to be missing some things, because most of the time when you take out that top dash speaker out of that Dodge Ram, it wasn't a tweeter, right? It was what I like to call a middler. It was like a 2 3/4 inch mid-range tweeter speaker thing. Well, when you put just a tweeter in its place, it's not playing the same spectrum of frequencies that middler was. So now you're actually missing some of the mid-range. So what you've done in that scenario is you've literally cut out everything in the middle. You've got a 6x9 in the door playing some mid-bass, you've got a tweeter in the top dash playing high frequency, but you're missing everything else in the middle. So what we would need to do in that scenario is, sum those signals, run those into our amplifier, and then run that out to our passive crossover, out to our crossover network with the component speakers, and let it divide up the signals to the appropriate drivers. And the difference in sound is night and day when it's done correctly versus trying to hodgepodge it with what's there. So this is just a basic example on your screen of what can be done with the LC6I. On the LC6I, you also do have independent controls for the 6 channels of RCA output. So it's one control per pair of outputs. So front, rear, sub, or channels 1, 2, 3, however you want to look at that. Moving on from the LC6i is the LC7i. The LC7i is more popular than the LC6i because it has AccuBase. So one of the cool things on the 7i is the AccuBase built in. We talked about AccuBase a little bit earlier with the LC2i. I told you AccuBase would be carried through a lot of the products we talked about. Well, here's one of them. So with the LC7i, like I mentioned, you've got AccuBase on here. We also have, same thing, 6 channels of high-level input, 6 channels of low-level output. We also have a port for the ACR controller. So if we want to run a bass knob for the dash and do independent control there, we've got that. This will also do signal summing for you. So if we need to do some summing, this will certainly pull it off. But one of the other cool things that's built into these, you guys, is what's called auto mode. Auto mode's pretty slick, and I've got a slide here I think that shows it a little bit better. So auto mode and summing are going to allow you to, as you see on your screen, basically bring in, say, high frequencies to the channel 1, low frequencies to channel 2, and nothing to channel 3. Because in a lot of cars, you don't have a factory sub, right? We don't have high, mid, and low in a lot of vehicles. We just have highs and lows. Well, what are we going to do when we're trying to put in a 5-channel amp or a 4-channel in a mono or something like that? How are we going to get signal for that sub amp? How are we going to get full range to all those speakers? The LC7i is a pretty simple, elegant solution for something like that, right? It makes life really easy when that's the type of car you're dealing with. So like you see on your screen there, we bring the highs into channels 1 or the main input. We bring the lows into channel 2, and then using auto mode will take signal from channel 2 and it'll automatically populate the outputs on channel 3. So like in this case, we're bringing low frequency info into channel 2. That's great. That can also drive the subwoofer output on channel 3. So we don't have to take speaker wire and do little loops on the input side of this. Auto mode will do that for you. The other cool thing that's built into this, like I mentioned a minute ago, is signal summing. Summing is going to show up physically on the device with these little lights that say connected to main channel. Connected to main channel indicators will light up when it's a summed signal. So you may be wondering, well, how do you do that? How do you sum a signal on an LC7i? How do we do that? There's 4 little screws on these devices that allow us to take the top covers off. Once the top covers are taken off, you can see all of the guts, obviously. But one of the other cool things that we have in here is these little jumpers inside. So there's several little jumpers, and you'd be amazed how many guys have been putting in audio control products for a few years and had no idea that there's jumpers inside at all, right? Just about every product has some sort of jumpers on it, whether they're internal or external. There's almost always something. So on an LC7i, let's say we did want to use auto mode, like I'm showing you on the screen there, to populate channel 3's outputs from the input of channel 2. There's a little jumper on here that says auto mode. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Extreme close-up.
Extreme close-up, like Wayne's World. So just take these little jumpers. They're just a little plastic piece. Slide them on there for off or on, whichever way you want that to work. This is also where we are going to change if we want to use GTO. There's a jumper for GTO on and off. And then I talked earlier as well about ground isolation. So let's say you put in an LC7i and you get it all done, you used auto mode, you followed my awesome drawing diagram that's on your screen right now, and you did your summing, and the system sounds good and everything, but every time you turn it off or maybe turn it on, there's a pop or a click or a thump or some sort of buzz or hissing noise or something like that. The first thing that we'll normally ask you is, A, is it grounded properly? Where is it grounded to? Did you T-tap a ground off of something else, or did you actually ground this thing the right way? But we'll also a lot of times suggest that you try using the ground isolation that's built into these. So on the LC7i, it's kind of hard to see. It's over here on the side a little bit. But there's a little jumper there that's going to come from the factory as isolated. So what that really means, you guys, is that when we send ground into the product, over here on the power connector, right, we feed it ground, it is going to keep that ground separate from the ground that is part of the audio side of things, okay? So that's how they come defaulted, as isolated. We can also have them combine those grounds. So you can move this little jumper down to the G and D section, and it's going to basically take those grounds and, you know, combine them, use them together to try to get rid of that noise. The other choice on here shows a little 200 and an ohm signal. You can do that same setting, put it on there. It's going to also combine those, but it's going to apply some resistance there as well and try to clean up that issue. I would say maybe, I don't know, 80–90% of the time, we can get rid of most of the little clicks, pops, hisses, buzzing, engine whine, all sorts of weird stuff can be accomplished just by switching one little jumper. That is such a headache solver for technicians. It's pretty awesome.
While we're talking about summing and the LC6i and LC7i and having this diagram up, I wanted to reinforce that almost every analog summing device is going to take and sum to the main output.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a huge thing to pay attention to. So here's a question for you guys. If you're looking at that diagram on the screen right now, and you take an RCA and plug it into the channel 2 output, what signal are you going to get? Is that going to be a summed output, or what does it look like? So if you're looking at this page right now, it will not be a summed output. It's going to be getting that signal from the low frequency signal in the diagram. All right, so that will pass through input 2 to output 2. And then the main output is where you're going to have your summed results.
Yeah. And so that's important to know, not only because we need to know where the summed results are going to come out of, but there may be times where you want the summed result for the fronts, but you may still want to use those rears and pass them through to just do rear fill or something like that. But also, to me, almost more importantly, there are times where, this is going to cause the end result to be, yes, we have bass, yes, we have everything we want, and it's summed and everything sounds great, but they're going to lose fader in a lot of those situations. Now, again, I would say a good majority of customers out there probably don't care about the ability to fade. I'd be willing to bet if you went and got in any of the cars in the parking lot right now, I'd bet you 99% of them the fader is set to 0, right? Most people don't use that a lot, but it is something to bring up with your customer if you're a shop that's installing this professionally, that you may want to mention to them, hey, this is going to work great, but we are going to lose the ability to fade. Again, to me, if a system's set up properly, you don't really need it once it's all dialed in, but just something to mention. One other thing I'll bring up real quick while we're on the topic of summing and all that type of stuff, I forgot to show you this, is when you take off these covers, on the inside here, there is a little diagram in there that shows you where the jumpers are and what they do. I know that seems really, really simple, but you may not be, but you might be surprised how many calls we get that say, hey, I took the lid off. Which one is auto mode? Which one is summing? Which one is this? Which one is that? They are labeled on the underside of that panel. They are also labeled on the PC board, but with everything else going on there, sometimes it can be hard to see. Almost more importantly, however, is on the PC board, there's a couple of things you definitely want to see, and that are a spike up there in the corner. And we also have the little Chicks Dig It logo up there. So, really important stuff. We want to make sure that everybody sees those. So that's one of the things with the LC7i, why it's so important, why so many people use it. One of the things we didn't talk about much was the AccuBase portion of it. So again, AccuBase on the LC7i, like I talked about with the LC2i, AccuBase is going to be affecting channels 3 or the bass output, okay? It does not affect channels 1 and 2. So make sure if you're using this and you want to use AccuBase, make sure that we're using this on channels 3 for the woofer. That usually goes without saying, but just one of those things we like to mention. Same thing, if you plug in an ACR dash control knob, it is going to affect the channel 3 output, whatever that may be, whether that's out to a subwoofer or out to a set of tower cans in a marine install or whatever the case may be, right? With AccuBase, briefly, the way to set up AccuBase, it's really pretty simple, but we still get a ton of calls on how to do this, and I still see a ton of techs install these things and they never set up the AccuBase at all, or they set it up incorrectly. I took a call from a guy yesterday. He said, hey, it sounds really good at quarter volume, half volume, and at 3/4 volume, the bass gets quieter. Well, AccuBase was not only set up incorrectly, it was set up almost backwards. It was boosting everything at low volume and not boosting anything at high volume. So the way to set up AccuBase, you guys, is we're going to use level and threshold on the top of the product. Threshold, the easiest way to think of this, threshold is when, level is how much. So when does AccuBase kick in? How much does it kick in? That's how I always think of AccuBase. So you would basically have everything set up, have everything dialed in with your AccuBase level. I usually leave level at about 12 o'clock. Threshold, I'll leave all the way down. I start to play a song that I am familiar with, that I know what the bass should sound like, and I want to turn up the volume on my factory stereo until I find that point where the bass either plateaus or drops out. So let's say your radio goes to 60, we'll use that example again, and at volume 45, the bass doesn't get any louder. Now, if you have an RTA, you could absolutely verify this in the signal. If you're doing it by ear, you can still do it pretty well. So find that number where the bass doesn't get any louder. So again, we said 45 is that point. So stop touching the volume at 45. We figured out that's where the bass plateaus. We stop. Don't touch the volume anymore. Now we want to come over here to threshold, and we want to very, very slowly turn up the threshold. I say slowly because there is a slight delay on Accubass kicking in. So you're going to want to listen for it, okay? You can't just sit there and watch the woofers or whatever. You have to listen for it and wait for it to kick back into the system. Don't just sit here and turn the knob back and forth, okay? Turn this very slowly. As you start to hear the woofers kick back into the system, stop touching the threshold, okay, once you get there. Now take level and adjust the level for how much. Make the woofers portion of the system, the subwoofers portion, the bass, make it match the rest of the system in volume and quantity, right? So now once you're done with that, you think you have it set up correctly, you should be able to go back to that factory volume knob, turn it all the way down, and turn it up past that 45, and the bass should be consistent the whole way. We should have a little bit of bass at low volume, lots of bass at high volume, right? Sounds pretty simple, pretty straightforward. That's because it is. So that pretty much covers the LC7i. Let's move on to some other products here so we're not here all day.
Talking about Accubass though, real quick, just so you know,
totally.
Accubass, beyond the threshold, if you're using the level, it can add up to 15 dB of gain or boost, okay? So that's the number, and sometimes people will want to know that, but that is the number.
And it can be used in systems without bass roll-off too. That's something else we should mention is, let's say you have a car that doesn't have bass roll-off. Maybe your system is consistent all the way from 0 to 100. If you just want to use Accubass to add a boost somewhere, you can. If you want to use it to fatten up bass at low volume, you could do that. If you want to make it so that there's a little bit more kick at, 3/4 volume, you can certainly do that. It doesn't have to be for bass roll-off. That's just what it was designed for. So there's a couple of diagrams on your screen right now too, just showing some typical uses for the LC7i. One of the things that's not shown here, but that I like to point out to guys too, is that you could use an LC6i or LC7i as a basic summing device when you're using another device that doesn't have enough inputs. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're using one of our DSPs. Let's say you purchased the DM608, and this is what we're going to use for our DSP in the car. That's great. This has 6 channels of high-level input. You figured that was going to be enough in your car, and you're all set. But you go to put it in, and you find out that your car actually has 8 or 10 channels that you need to fit in to this DSP. Well, what are you going to do? Could you return this and get a DM810? Maybe. Maybe even the DM810 is not enough channels. Maybe you have 12 channels of audio you need to pipe into this thing. Okay, fine. So you've got a DM810. But what you could do is you could still take an LC7i, use it as a basic summing device just to combine a couple of channels and then feed those summed channels into the DSP. So you could use this as kind of a pre-summing device and then go into the DSP and do all of your work in here. So it's one of those little uses for the LC6i, LC7i that I think gets kind of forgotten about a lot.
I don't know if Matthew even knows what's in my car, but
I know you have something like that in yours.
Yeah. So a DM810, a Kia Optima, one of the most popular cars out there, 11 active channels from the factory, right? And so one of the cool things is I wanted to demo the factory system exactly and then show what muting the rear fill, muting the center channel sounded like. And so people could say, oh, this is what the factory would sound like with the factory up mixer. Yeah. And then this is what like a single seat car could sound like. And so that exact same setup, I used the LC6i as a preamp to the DSP. So, you can sum multiple channels where I wanted to keep all 11 active channels and go into the 810. So
it's actually one of the reasons I brought it up, because I was thinking of Chris's car. I was like, that's a great example of how to use that thing. So thought I would mention that. So moving on to the LC8i. The LC8i is a really cool piece. This works really well. I suggest this piece a lot when guys call me and they say, hey, I'm going to use an LC7i, but my customer doesn't want to lose the fader, and they need to still do signal summing. Well, the LC8i is a great way around that, because you can still do summing from channel 2 and the main input and get your main output, but you could still keep another channel separate and you know, still have front, rear, and sub outputs and maintain the fader, depending on, of course, what the vehicle is and what that channel configuration looks like. But it's a quick, easy way to get a couple extra channels of input. The other cool thing that's on here is an aux input. So with the LC8i, you can actually switch between factory input sound from, say, the factory radio and that aux input, and it comes with a dash ACR3 controller that comes with it. So when you're using the ACR controller, you can switch between the sound from the factory radio and the sound from your aux input. That aux input's great on a lot of modern vehicles that maybe, you know, came with everything except Bluetooth audio. So maybe you want to add just a $50 Bluetooth chip on there, you know, something basic that just gives your customer Bluetooth audio. Maybe they want to add satellite radio and they don't want it FM modulated, because we all know FM modulators really don't sound that good. Maybe they just want an aux in, right? Maybe it's a car that doesn't even have an aux. This is a great way to pipe it in there. So there's a lot of different uses that you could do with this. You could feed navigation tones in there. You could feed a Bluetooth hands-free kit. Anything that you want to feed into that audio system. It's just a quick, easy way to get an extra input into the system without having to splice into the speaker wires like a lot of Bluetooth phone kits would require you to do, or without having you use an FM modulator or some sort of extra you know, adapter or interface module or something like that. So pretty cool piece. So like I said, the LC8i, like the name suggests, is 8 channels in, 8 channels out, high to low conversion. It is an active piece. It does not have Accubase built in, just to be clear. But there's a good example on the screen of one of the popular ways that this would be used. So in this case, you know, maybe it's a luxury car, maybe it's whatever, a Lexus or a Lincoln or something like that, where it has a lot of separately amplified independent channels. Or maybe it's a Kia Optima with 11 channels of you know, pre-crossed over audio in there. The LC8i would be a cool way to, you know, get some decent audio output out of that system, maybe without doing a DSP. Because although DSPs are great, they're not for everybody, right? They're not going to be for every customer. They're not going to fit every customer's budget, etc. So these are a quick, easy way to do that. And like you see on there, you can also feed in that iPod or sat radio or Bluetooth or whatever it is that you want to pipe into that system. So moving on to another piece, the LCQ1. This is a pretty neat piece. I really like these because they're simple, they're clean, but they still give you some extra options. So the LCQ1 is essentially an LC7i, but we've added EQ channels. Okay, so you've got 6 channels of EQ on the front, 6 channels of EQ on the rear, and then we have 5 channels of EQ, or 5 bands, I should say, not channels, 5 bands of EQ plus Accubase on the channel 3 or sub output. So all the same things apply. We can still do signal summing with this. We can still do auto mode that we talked about a little bit ago. This will accept a remote level control, so we can have a sub control knob. But like I said, this will just also give you some bands of EQ. Why is that important? Because think of how many vehicles you hop in that all they have from the radio, from the factory, is bass and treble, right? There's not a whole lot there to work with. I don't care how good the speakers and amplifiers and everything else are that you put in, if all you have to tune it with is bass and treble, it's going to be tough to make that thing sound great, right? So this would be a great way to get a little bit more control. So moving on, let's see here. So just some examples of how to use an LCQ1, a couple of different ways that you might do that. The top example is probably one of the most popular ones there. You'll see the dashed line for subwoofer. That basically just means that you don't have to feed a sub signal into this. We could just feed in front and rear, and we could still populate all 6 channels of output using auto mode. The DQ61 is another one that I wanted to talk about. DQ61 is a really cool product. This is, again, one of my favorites. I think this is a really neat piece, and it's very, very unique. So the DQ61, think of this like kind of an LCQ1 plus some time delay or time alignment or time correction, whatever you want to think of it as. So the DQ61, 6 channels of high-level input, 6 channels of low-level output. It does have a port for the dash control knob as well. So it's going to come with an ACR3 dash control knob. And a couple of cool features up here. Of course, we have our EQ channels for the front, rear, and sub. We also have Acubase built in. But one of the things that's unique about this one is that we have not only output levels like we do on, say, an LC7i or an LCQ1, but we also have input levels. So we can actually mix a little bit better how much of each input is being, put into that summing that we're doing or sent out of that signal path. We can actually affect that here on the input side before it gets summed, and then we can adjust it on the output side as well. So that part's pretty unique. One of the other cool things is the signal delay mode. I love the signal delay in this because it's super simple. It's not, quite as elaborate as a DSP or something like that, but it's a great step between for the guy that, needs a little bit more than an LC7i or an LCQ1, but isn't quite ready to maybe jump up to a full DSP. Could we argue that every car needs a DSP? Sure. You could ask me, what's the one thing I could add to every car to make it sound better? I would tell you DSP, right? But again, not every customer wants a DSP. Not every customer can afford a DSP. Not every system needs a DSP. This is a great go-between. And so without getting super in-depth, the signal delay on this is basically controlled via analog controls. And what I mean by that is you don't measure anything, you don't use any software. There is no software that goes with this, okay? You sit in the driver's seat, you flip a knob on the product itself, you sit in the driver's seat and play some music that you're familiar with. I usually use something with a strong female vocal, maybe something kind of acoustic, pop on my favorite Norah Jones track, something like that. And I'll use that dash control knob, and as you click that knob, it basically moves her voice from the left side of the car, and you'll hear her voice jump until it's in the middle with every click of the knob. Once she's center of the soundstage, you stop touching the knob, you play a song that has some bass in it, you click the dash knob once, and then start turning it again, and now as you click that knob, you're going to hear the subwoofer move from the rear of the car to the middle of the vehicle. When you're all done and you're happy with it, you go back to the trunk, flip this little knob to normal, and you're done. Like I said, there's no software, there's no measuring anything. It's some of the simplest signal delay or time correction that you'll ever experience. I used to have one of these in my own car. I've had a DQ61, I've had a DQ-DX, and they work incredibly well, especially for something that is, as simple to set up as this is. If you're a tech and you don't like software, you don't like using laptops, you don't like doing DSP stuff, maybe you're a little bit afraid of it because you haven't done a lot of it or whatever the case may be, this is a really cool go-between. And same thing when we pull off the cover on this one, you guys, we have a little chart inside there that shows you where all the controls are, and you have the ability to do your signal summing, do auto mode, do all of those things.
I think one of the things that I'd like to say about the DQ61, and just when so many guys out there do worry about DSP and, oh, I have a 10-year-old laptop, brick laptop, and I'm afraid of it, or you tried DSP and you spent hours and hours and hours and hours trying to get it tuned and
it still weren't happy with it
and stuff like that. Just so we're clear, a DQ61 is a DSP. It just has analog pots. So, it's like a DSP Lite in that you can get in there, you can do all the adjustments through EQ, time alignment, and then also the gain structure for input and output because it is a DSP. It just uses analog pots to control it. So it's a DSP Lite, really. And
that's a great way to put it, DSP Lite. I like that.
And it's one of the only summing devices that you can sum to multiple outputs as well. So, cool. Even though it completely seems like an analog piece because of all those analog pots on it, it is a DSP. It can do some stuff that, you cannot do with a LC7i or anybody's summing device for that matter. And I think for, right at $300, that thing comes with the ACR controller, which is, roughly a $40 part that comes with it, So when you're looking at it and going, hey, control, summing capability, equalization capability, line driver,
line output converter,
all that stuff in one piece, and roughly if you look at it, if you were buying it standalone, $260, it's actually a really cool piece that I think is kind of underutilized.
I was going to say the same thing. I feel like it's underutilized. I think a lot of guys forget about it, or they just go, oh, I'm going to go from an LC7 straight to a DSP, and they don't think there's anything in between. It's a really cool go-between. I love that piece. I think it's super cool. So a couple examples there just of how the DQ61 can be used. In this case, they're showing an epicenter as well, but you guys get the idea, not rocket science. So speaking of DSPs, we are nearing the end here, but I want to talk to you guys a little bit too. We talked about, this is all about factory system upgrades today, right? That's what we're talking about today. Well, the ultimate upgrade for a factory system is a DSP. Like I mentioned earlier, when I get calls from dealers, consumers, hell, friends of mine, whatever, and they go, hey, what's the one thing I could add to my car to make it sound better? I already have amplifiers, I already have new speakers and a sub. It sounds good, but what can I do to make it sound better? The two things I always mention are DSP and sound deadening. Those are the two things almost every system needs more of if they don't already have it. So we offer two DSPs. We offer the, or two, digitally controlled DSPs, I should say. We have the DM608 and the DM810. The part numbers are simple. DM608 is 6 channels of input, 8 channels of output. The DM810 is 8 channels of input, 10 channels of output. So to be clear on these, yes, these will make great additions to any factory system because they have high level inputs, but they also do have low level inputs as well. So if you are, maybe you're sticking with the factory radio for now, but in the future planning on going to an aftermarket double din or touchscreen or something like that, these will work great for that too. You could always change it later. These also have digital inputs. So these have a coax digital and an optical in. So if you are somebody that's driving a vehicle and they make a Pack Amp Pro, the preamp piece, you can get the optical adapter for that and run optical into this DSP. Or maybe you have a European car that Mobridge makes an adapter for. They have a fiber optic to optical adapter. I've used those a lot in the past. Same thing, you could run a single fiber optic cable straight into this guy. Forget about RCAs, forget about high level inputs, forget about all that. Go straight digital in and you're ready to go. So some really cool stuff we could do with these. With DSP, we could spend 3 hours talking just DSP. I'm just kind of covering, broad overview here today. If you want more info on these guys, you could of course hit up our website or watch one of our previous trainings where we dove into the software and stuff like that. But the thing I like guys to remember with DSP is at its very core basics, what can a DSP do? It can be your line driver, your line output converter, your crossover, your equalizer, your time correction, your Accubase, but also the name itself is the thing to think about. DM stands for digital matrixing. What that basically means is we can take any input and assign it to any output. And that's one of those things that I think a lot of guys kind of gloss over and glance over a little bit. They kind of skip over it. And that is that literally we can take any input and assign it to any output or every output. If you want to bring in 2 channels of audio into this and assign it to all 8 or 10 channels of output, you can do that. So don't just think of these as, hey, I'm doing an SQ system or I'm doing this or that. If you're a bass guy and you're doing an SPL rig and you just need something to send signal out to all 5 of your big 4,000 watt sub amps, you could totally use one of these to do that, okay? Not only could you do that, but you're also gonna have up to a 10 volt signal coming out of this guy if you want it. So just keep that in mind for you guys that are thinking this is all SQ stuff. It doesn't have to be. These can be used for a number of different things, of course.
I think for processors, the DM608 and DM810 for loud car systems, PA style,
yeah.
Where they're
the pro audio systems.
Yeah, pro audio systems where they have, different zones, so to speak. I think the DM processor is probably one of the best solutions in that you have up to 10 volts on up to 10 channels of output. So great for sub, big sub guys who, won't need a line driver or, anything to drive multiple amplifiers.
Yeah, you won't need it. You've got it.
Yeah, and then with the control app, it makes it even cooler because, if you are demoing your vehicle and you only want to turn up, say, the trunk speakers, you can program that into the DSP and allow you to do that wirelessly through the app. So very cool stuff.
That's a really good point. I'll show the DM Control app real quick that Chris is talking about. So the DM Control app is something that's available right now. This app itself is something that's free. You put this on your phone, and what it basically allows you to do is have some basic control wirelessly over the DM608, DM810. or pretty much anything with a D in its part number, to be honest, that has the option port, I should say. So basically what this allows you to do, you guys, is you can have a master volume here, you could have a sub volume control, and you've got your DSP presets down at the bottom. So when Chris mentions the DM Control app, that's what he's talking about. This does not get you into all of the tuning and all of the deep settings that are in these, because a lot of times that's not what we need, right? We're just wanting to do a quick demo. Well, cool, you can have one preset for demos and doing hair tricks, and a different demo for actually listening to music if you want to. You know, you could do however you want to do that. So some pretty cool stuff that we can do with that. Like I said, that's a free app that we offer as well. So moving on, one of the things I wanted to mention, since we are talking about factory system upgrades, is LGDs. We have a whole training on just LGDs. If you guys aren't familiar with LGDs, or you wonder, why do I need these? What are they for? We have a whole hour that we did on just LGDs. So if you're not familiar with these, or you need to brush up, go on Facebook, scroll down back a few weeks, and pull up that LGD training and give it a watch. It was a pretty good one. So, you know, we were thinking, could we really do an hour on just LGDs? Absolutely, we could do an hour on LGDs. That was a good training. So anyhow, I just wanted to mention, you know, don't forget to use LGDs on pretty much all modern vehicles. You know, a lot of guys will kind of give me the side eye and go, oh, come on, do I really need it on every car? To be honest, if it's anything that was made in the last 10 years, yeah, you really do. Can you get away without it? Sure. But I mean, we could get away with a lot of things, right? But we're not trying to get away with stuff. We're trying to do it right. And if you want to do it right and have it be as good as it can possibly be, you know, make good sound great per se, we want to use an LGD, right? That's the right thing to do. That's the right way to do it. And it's just going to prevent so many headaches. They also are super easy to use. You know, if you're putting in your whatever, your DQ61, and you remember that you were supposed to use LGDs on this, these guys have these really cool quick connect Phoenix connector ends on them. They literally plug right in on the input side, and then your inputs, oops, if I plug this in correctly, there we go, and then plug your input into it. It's a 30-second install. They come in a 2-pack, and it makes life so much easier when we're working on all these newer vehicles.
I feel like I want to be like a mom saying, eat your vegetables. Right?
Use your LGDs.
Use your LGDs,
right?
guys.
Yep, I agree. So like I said, we're not going to dive into all those because we're running out of time today. But if you want more info on the LGDs, definitely check out that previous training. That was a good one to watch. We're also going to talk about a couple of new products real quick. So we've talked about these in the past, but we'll briefly go over them just to give you guys some ideas real quick. So the new LC1i, this is a new product coming very, very soon. This is our basic high to low adapter, or high to low converter, I should say. This is still an active piece, so it does require power and ground, but there's some cool new features built into this. When you're looking at the LC2i that many of you are familiar with, you'll see, physically speaking, this is quite a bit smaller. It's also quite a bit thinner. It's just kind of trimmed down, slimmed down, a little bit sleeker than the LC2i. LC2i is a great piece, but not everybody needs AccuBase, okay? Not everybody needs a dash control knob. Not everybody wants to use an ACR1. Sometimes you just want to use the bass knob that came with the amplifier, or you don't want to use one at all. That's fine. The LC1i does not have a port for an ACR1 bass knob, and it does not have AccuBase built in. However, these ones are going to sell at a lower retail price, be offered at a lower retail price. So these will be a great kind of go-between when you don't quite want to use, you know, super basic junk, but we maybe don't quite need something as nice as an LC2i. The LC1i is going to be a great go-between for that. Another couple of cool things that are built in here. We talked earlier about GTO briefly, and that's our DC offset based generated turn on, or great turn on is what we call GTO. This also has a new feature in it called audio turn on. So audio turn on is going to be awesome for these really late model vehicles. A lot of the newer cars and European cars, DC offset type turn on like GTO does not work well in those newer cars because they don't have 6 volts on the speaker leads. When you turn on the radio, there isn't 6 volts present on the speaker leads like there was maybe a few years ago. So audio turn on that's built into this guy works really, really well for those scenarios, because what this is looking for is just anything over, I believe it's 40 millivolts on the input side to turn it on and generate a remote turn on lead for your amplifiers. Another cool thing on this one is you'll notice the ground isolation to get rid of any noise, etc., is on the outside. You do not have to pop the top off. There's nothing inside, so do not take these apart. There's just a switch right on top. And then we also have load select built in. So if you are doing just a quick sub upgrade, you removed the woofer out of the rear deck of that Dodge Charger, and you're going to use that as a way to port some bass into the car. Okay, fine, but you took a speaker out of the signal path. So we would need to use an LGD, right? That's what these are for. In this case, though, if you're using an LC1I, you're not going to need an LGD in that scenario because this has it built in. Right on top here, we have load select. There are 3 options there. All you'll have to do is switch it to the one you need, plug it in, and away you go.
A lot of guys sell the load generators for about $30, right? Mm-hmm. So, when you look at it and it's built in, that's a $30 value that's built into it. So
yeah, a lot of shops sell these 30 or 40 bucks even. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you take that out of the cost of one of these, and it puts this down to right around that same price, honestly. So yeah.
Matt, when he was first talking about it, he was saying, does everybody need this? Does everybody need that? I would say, does everybody need a line driver? Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
They
actually
have an amplifier.
Yeah. They may not believe they do, but they do.
Yeah, that's the other cool thing. So like, if a customer comes to you guys, right, and then they have a base package put in, and you say use an LC1I when they start shipping at the end of summer. I'm actually building some delay on there. When they actually do that base package with an LC1I, and then they come back and they get a new source unit, keep the LC1I in there and use it as a line driver.
That's a really good point. I did not mention that, and I should have. And I normally do when I talk about these. But so besides this being a high to low converter, Chris brought up a good point. You may notice while I'm talking about this thing or seeing it on your screen there, this has low level inputs as well. That's so that you can use it as a line driver. And you could grab it off the shelf and sell it as a line driver to a guy that got a base package 6 months ago and he's just not quite happy with it or wants more output. What a great way to add some output. Put a line driver in line in the signal path and bump up that line voltage for him, right? And but alternatively, if he comes, in, gets a base package from you today, but comes back in a few weeks and gets a doubled in, well, you don't have to return this, refund it, take it out, whatever. Leave it in there, run it as a line driver, and you're going to have a better signal to that amp. Because no matter what doubled in you sell them, there isn't one out there that's got more than 4, 5, 6 volts on its RCA outputs.
So yes, it does have a triggered output as well on that.
So moving on here, guys.
However, side note, it is, it does have that, built-in LGD and stuff, which, is a $30 to $40 value, but it does not have a bass knob.
Right. No bass knob, no AccuBass.
No bass knob option. It is really a basic line driver, line output converter, no AccuBass. It's purely, for use for a lot of applications where, if you had a DSP and you had a center channel, you could use that as, even a single channel center channel device. So a lot of different applications, but it is really basic. However, go ahead.
However, you may want the new LC2i Pro. So for those of you looking at the one eye and going, hey, that's really cool. I've been doing the 2 eyes forever. They're great. I just wish they had a couple of cool things. There's a couple of things I would change or make different. I'll be honest, the only thing that drives me, doesn't drive me crazy, but I wish was different on the LC2i is the threshold for AccuBass is on the side of the product here by the RCAs. And from somebody that used to install a lot of these, once they're installed and the RCAs are plugged in and it's mounted behind a panel, sometimes that can be hard to get to, right? And some techs, some of the shops that I go into to do trainings don't know that that exists. They don't know that that threshold is there, which means, unfortunately, they've never set one up correctly. But what if that could change? So if we have the new LC2i Pro, you'll notice a couple of cool things. You've got one on your screen in front of you right now, but your AccuBass is right on top of the product. You have threshold and level right on top, right where you can get at it. Super, super easy. There's also an LED now for AccuBass, which shows when AccuBass is engaged. Again, making it faster and easier, more efficient for you guys to set up. We don't want you taking 20 minutes to set up AccuBass. Setting up AccuBass should be a 2-minute process, right? It should not be that complicated to get done. And even with the existing LC2i, it's not. It's still a 2-minute process with this one if you know how to do it. But making that even easier is what we wanted to do. So we've got them right on top. We've got the LED. We mentioned with the LC1i, the LGDs built in, the load generating built in, the load matching circuitry, whatever you want to call it, built in there. The LC2i Pro also has that built in right here on the top where it says load select. you can see there are 3 settings there. So you can switch between any one of the 3 different LGDs that you might need, and all you've got to do is flip a little switch and you have any one of these guys at your disposal, depending on what car it is. You'll notice with this one too, physically speaking, this has gotten slimmed down a little bit. It's a little bit trimmer than the LC2i. It's a little bit, it's a little bit longer, not by much, maybe an inch or two. Not even, maybe an inch. Yeah, maybe half an inch longer. Yeah, not much. But really a good looking piece. It's slimmed down, it's grown up a little bit, just looks a little bit sleeker. So some cool stuff built into this one.
When we start shipping the Pros, which are, you know, a couple months out, we actually have some that may be available sooner for testing, some further testing and stuff. But the Pro, you guys, is made for all of you installers out there. That's a 2-year project of just working with our dealer base and installers to say, hey, what is needed in a device, right?
Yeah.
And so the Pro piece really designates that it's all built from the input from all of you professionals out there, you know?
Yeah, we took all the advice from the field, all the stuff that you guys said you'd like to see in a high quality LOC, active LOC, and we put it in there, right? We built in the load matching circuitry. We put in the new audio turn on because GTO, you know, is not going to work in every car. It just can't. There's certain cars that's not going to work. So we built in a new turn on mode. So now with those 3 turn on modes at your disposal, again, there's literally nothing you can't do. Okay, you have the load matching circuitry in there with the LGDs. There's no car that you can't handle. Also, when this ships, it ships with the ACR1 in the package. So you don't have to sell your customer an LC2i plus a package of LGDs plus an ACR1, you know, dash control knob. That's all in here. Okay, this comes with an ACR1 in the package. When it hangs on your shelf, it's right above it right here. You can see it from a mile away. You can tell instantly that, hey, this comes with that knob. So it's really pretty slick. We're really excited to get these out there. We're working as diligently as we can to make that happen as quickly as we can. So pretty excited. So one other thing I'm going to mention before we wrap up is just having the right tools for the job. When it comes to factory system integration and factory system upgrades, it's important to know what you're working with, right? It's important to know what type of signal you're dealing with. It's important to know what you just tapped into, right? We don't know for sure what's full range and what's not, and vice versa. Things get infinitely easier and faster and just more cohesive when you know what you're working with, right? Just like you have your Snap-on toolbox and your Matco screwdrivers and your Milwaukee drill and this, that, and the other, you invest in the right tools for the job. This is along those same lines. And so I'm showing you the DMRTA Pro kit on there, which is obviously an incredible piece for the professional or even for the consumer that wants to really take this stuff seriously. But I also showed down there at the bottom one of our SA series microphones. These get overlooked quite a bit, I think, and they're a really cool piece. They are an RTA SPL microphone, so they can do both. They run an app on an Apple device, so either an iPad or a iPod Touch or an iPhone. You literally plug it straight into the Lightning connector, and now you have a high-quality RTA microphone that's also capable of doing SPL measurements. So really, really cool when you're trying to tune the system, when you're trying to go through and make your system changes and stuff like that, trying to get some sort of flat response out of the system, or even analyzing issues and problems that are there now. Maybe even before you work on the car, you use that microphone to RTA the car and just see where the deficiencies are. See what it's lacking. Is it lacking bass? Is it lacking mid-range? Is there too much treble? That little microphone is a pretty inexpensive piece considering all that it can do for you. So maybe you're watching this and you're not a professional. Maybe you're not a shop. Maybe you are a consumer and you don't necessarily want or need to invest in a DMRTA Pro kit because it just doesn't make sense for you. Those SA microphones are a great way to go. Really cool stepping stone for that type of setup. I also show off to the right-hand side there the DMRTA checklist. That's something that's available for free in our Facebook groups in the documents section, as well as on our website in the knowledge base. You can download that PDF and use it with the DMRTA, and it helps to walk you through doing any sort of factory system upgrade. And basically by the end of that DMRTA checklist, you know exactly what you need to integrate and how you're going to integrate into that car.
So we're about wrapped up. I asked if anybody had questions, and Todd thought we should talk about some of the pricing. Okay, so we do have this on Facebook, so we'll talk about the retail pricing of all the products. So not shipping yet, but within a couple of months, the LC1i is going to be our AudioControl entry level active line output converter and line driver. That's going to be an $80 price point piece, US. All right. Then you step up from there, and you got a $100 piece, the LC2i. That's $100, and then typically there's about a 65 to 75% attachment to an LC2i of ACR. So you guys do a fantastic job out there of making sure if you're doing an LC2i, you're using a bass knob with it. So, you know, that kind of logically gets you into a $140 price point on a standard LC2i. Well, the Pro is going to be, you know, $140, $150 retail piece. And that's going to come with everything, including the load generation. So the LC2i, and the LC2i Pro, you know, because it is everything that has been asked from our dealer base for the last couple of years and working through engineering and trying to develop a product that is set apart, $150 for that piece is going to be an outstanding value with the load generation, with everything else. Because right now in the marketplace, any products that you buy from any aftermarket manufacturer anywhere in the world isn't going to have that stuff all built into it, right? So that for $150 has the load generation, has AccuBase, has, you know, tons and tons of capability with a 5-year warranty. So
absolutely,
really, really excellent stuff. And then we have logical price points on everything up and beyond that, you know, with the LC6i, LC7i. So you go from $150 to, you know, up to $180 to 200,
right?
250, 299. And then you get into our amplifiers, you know, starting at $449, DSPs, $599. So we have logical steps of progression and price points for every application out there. And, you know, even from $80 to, you know, we'll have amplifiers in the $1,300 price point coming up. Logical price points.
Everything is easy steps. Makes sense. And you know, one of the things that we didn't talk today with factory system upgrades, just because I knew it would take too long, is our amplifiers, because we've done separate trainings on just the amplifiers themselves. But just keep in mind that pretty much everything we've talked about today is available built into an amplifier. Okay, if you love the LC2i and you put these in 3 times a week and you sell them a lot and you love these, check out some of our amplifiers, because guess what? They have this built into it, right? Wouldn't that be easy? So that's just a little tidbit, you know, a little extra info there. Literally everything we've talked about is built into a model of amplifier somewhere in our lineup. A couple of the questions that came up, you know, does remote out does the remote become a remote out when using GTO or audio turn on? With the LC1i in particular, it actually has a remote out designated. It has a remote in and a remote out. The answer is yes, though. If you're using GTO or audio turn on, that does still operate. But on all of our products, just so that you know, if you use GTO, the remote terminal does become a turn on. So if you're talking about one of our amplifiers or one of our LC7Is, or, you know, most of these have, you know, like on the LCQ1, LC7i, they have remote in, remote out, so it's pretty clear. But if you're talking about one of our amplifiers, even just like an ACM amplifier, the real small ones, that remote terminal becomes a remote turn on output if you're using GTO, just so that you know. One of the other questions was on the SA4100 microphone, will it work with later than iPhone 6? Yes. The website just needs to be updated. It will work with all of the modern iPhones. Everything with a lightning connector on it, as far as I'm aware.
Cool. Well,
cool. I think that about wraps it up for today.
All right. If there's no more questions, guys, we want to thank you guys for joining us. It's always great to see you guys. I hope you guys are all doing well, that your businesses are thriving. That you're seeing, you know, continued success out there, and that we all are doing our part to make sure we're doing all we can for our customers and making their cars sound amazing. One of the things that I think we should even think about doing here at some point in the next is maybe even talking to throwing maybe one of our home products in the mix and
That'd be
going
fun.
over some of the features and benefits of some of our home stuff too. Because
That'd be cool.
you know, if you think we do some cool stuff in the car, man, we do some. There's some rocket science going on a lot of the home audio products that we do here. So,
absolutely.
Thank you guys. I'll let Matthew wrap it up, but from me, myself, appreciate you guys being here, and hope you guys have a killer rest of the day.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate you joining us today. Thanks for sticking around for a little over.